Just give us a sense how this is priced and how to look at how your food on the table is priced. We have Peter Kuguru, who's a small-scale miller right here in Nairobi, and just give us analysis on how much your plate of ugali would cost you. Next to Kuguru is Anzetse Were. Anzetse is a columnist right here at the Business Daily, but also an economist at large, and we want to get from you on these numbers, particularly into how it actually makes sense. Lady, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. An analysis from different aspects is just looking towards inflation numbers will rise. If I could just read out that for you, that's by NSC, who's like looking at Kenya's inflation is expected to be about 7.5% this year, and this has particularly been pegged on the food prices. Of course, we know the current prevailing figure is at 4.5%, just looking at it as at the number, but there are fears that this number could rise. Before I come to Kuguru, let me just talk to Anzetse really quickly. First of all, in your view, you say that perhaps most Kenyans do not really quite shop on the supermarket stalls, and maybe will be...
There are a couple of fallacies being peddled right now. I mean, if you look at the inflation figures, if you look at the last quarter of last year, we were well above the 7.5 ceiling. So I don't know where this 4.5 figure is coming from and how that was calculated. Because if you look at the trend towards the later part of last year, we were generally above the 7.5 ceiling. So when we're being told that, oh, inflation in Kenya will be at 7.5, I'm just sort of wondering what mathematics was created to make that happen. Particularly in the context of the fact that a lot of rains weren't as robust as we had hoped they would be. We still continue with a very difficult business environment where, yes, investors are beginning to invest, but there are many who are being held back. Where there's still pressure on the Kenyan shilling, especially as the U.S. economy recovers. So there are all these factors informing inflation, and I'm a bit concerned about giving Kenyans good news that, oh, inflation won't be an issue, when the reality is that there's on-the-ground realities that will inform how much you pay for the goods that you're buying. In terms of supermarkets, I think it's a very simplistic analysis. They are going to a supermarket and telling us the prices, because that's not where most Kenyans shop. Most Kenyans shop, about 90% of retail in Africa is in the informal sector. So people who buy their vegetables, their oil, their flour, their etc. is being done through informal markets, okay? So the supermarkets, they do have a very big segment, which is the middle class, who go there for convenience and all of that. But they're also missing out a massive segment of the Kenyan economy. But it's also be important
to get and to understand how these supermarkets also price their goods, and we'll be crossing over to Dan at about noon and just getting to have to get...
That's all well and good, but I think overstating their importance is arrogant. I think, if you look at that 90% of employed Kenyans sit in the informal economy, and that is probably where they buy their goods and services, this idea that supermarkets should be given a special position is a bit arrogant. It's a very middle-class thing. It's very much a Nairobi thing. Oh, we're in Nairobi and we think this is important. And I think that's very arrogant. If you go just a bit outside Nairobi, you'll find that people don't shop at Naivas or Tuskys or Nakumatt or Chandarana. They work with their local miller, their local person on the ground. That is where they buy their goods and services from. And I don't see the effort being expended by media or research bodies in general around understanding purchasing patterns in the informal economy, which provides the bulk of how we purchase as Kenyans.
All right, and talk about the informal economy and just looking towards the millers. There's been a lot of questions, and just particularly on how do you actually price the flour that you actually create as millers. Of course, the government, there was a lot of acrimony, especially moving in from the 90 shillings per 2-kilogram bag, and now, of course, it's being capped at 115 shillings. So just take us through, Mr. Kuguru, how do you actually price that ugali?
Okay, thank you, Laban. My name is Peter Kuguru. I'm the chairman of United Grain Millers Association, and we are a group of millers spread across Kenya, ranging from small millers to medium-sized millers. And we have this association so that we can be able to bring uniformity in the industry of milling, particularly maize milling, because that affects a lot of our wananchi, particularly the lower income. During the time of the subsidy, the government was supplying the maize to all the millers and outlets, and they were selling, they had pegged the price at 2,300 shillings per bag of 90 kilo of maize, cleaned maize. But after the subsidy ended on the 31st of December 2017, now we have got a free market. And the market is now demanding a price of between 2650 to 2700 shillings per bag of 90 kilos of maize. And that is what controls the price of the milled unga, the unga ugali. At the moment, we are releasing our group of millers. We are releasing the maize meal, 2 kilos, ugali flour, to the retailers, to the outlet, to the family groceries and supermarkets. We are releasing at approximately 100 shillings per packet of 2 kilos. That is a bill we are releasing at 1,200 shillings for a bill of 12 packets. And then we are asking our outlets, as a unified outlet, because we are working together as a team, to resell the 2 kilo packs, whether a supermarket or grocery stores, at not more than 150 shillings, not more.
Cost
so
us the 15 bob. How does it
so we
go
allow
about
them to have
from
a
the time?
We allow them to have a profit margin of 10 to 15%
to the supermarkets,
to all the outlets. So once we give them at 100 shillings, and we're telling them don't pass 115, because of competition, some are even selling at 112, 113, 114, to the maximum of 115. We're telling our guys, if you try to put in a price of more than 115, you probably push yourself out of market, because we're telling the demand, put more at 110.
Okay. But
as long as we are able to get maize at a price of not more than 2,700 shillings per bag, because that's a controlling factor, that's a base.
Okay, great.
So also remember, we're talking about cleaned maize, because when you get a maize from a farm, we need to get it at 24.50, because the maize from a farm is not clean. It contains chaff, muchako, you know,
we have to process,
it contains leaves, it contains stones. By the time you clean, you're losing almost 10% of the maize, the dirt and dust. So again, if they give us a price of 24.50 of not clean maize, we're able to clean it, and then by the time we have got an 80 kilo bag, it still reaches that to 27.
Great. Just so looking at it, there's kind of a 15 bob difference, and I'm just looking towards how that will be charged across many outlets. And you mentioned there's the kiosks, as you might say, we're just going towards that. How do you see that pricing model working?
Well, before I answer that, I want to say that I commend the model that they're working, because they could demand a lot more profit. You know, if they were very greedy and profit-oriented, because they are one of the main players, they could really demand a lot more. So I think we need to commend them for being quite reasonable and sober in pricing the maize the way they are. I think overall we need to understand that farming in general tends to be not a profitable enterprise for Kenyans. If you look at 7% of rural farmers in Kenya, a lot of them are on a subsistence basis. So that maize that they're producing may not even reach a gentleman like him. It may just be consumed in the local markets, and they may not get very much from it. I think in terms of the pricing, there's a lot of stuff that intermediaries do, particularly millers. I think they clean, they sort, and they grade maize, and then they mill the maize. You know, if we were to be given the maize from the farm to us, a lot of us wouldn't know what to do with it in terms of what do we do with this maize that we've been given. So we need to understand the people they've employed, the energy they're using, the premises that they're renting from, the equipment that they're using. That is all costs that they've built into the cost of maize that they're now pricing, I think, quite reasonably. The biggest risk I see happening is when there's going to be a decline in maize yields. As I said, the rains haven't been as robust as we've seen, and this sort of commitment to price it as a certain amount, I think is quite generous. We need to look at the actual cost of production. We need to look at the cost of wholesale and retail, and then look at if government wants to subsidize that, then that's a whole different conversation. But giving Kenyans this idea that this will be the price for the whole year, I think is quite dangerous.
All right. Now let's take a look inside a maize mill and get a feel of what goes in there. Zena Mondati recently toured a small-scale miller that's in Sugoi, Uasin Gishu County to learn about the maize milling process and the stages the maize goes through from the moment it arrives at the mill and it finally leaves as packaged unga. Take a look.
The maize milling process is actually a very interesting process. It starts off with what we define as very dirty maize. This is the maize that you receive from farmers or in some cases even the government, where the maize has all sorts of things in it. maize cobs, stalks, etc., even pieces of string. The interesting thing is that your equipment must be able to clean and separate out the impurities from the maize, and you can see the different impurities that you get. If the equipment doesn't separate that out, it affects the taste that you get in your final product. After the equipment has worked, you end up now with a much cleaner raw material to use, which is something like this. This now goes through the different stages in processing. What we basically do is add a little bit of water to the maize. This enables us to remove the bran and the germ from the maize, which is basically the outside of the maize and the oily part. The germ is the yellow oily part. And you end up having a mixture of bran and germ, which looks like this. Then you end up with maize, basically, which is the majority of it is now the starch, which will become more of the unga. This goes into your mill. This process here is actually done by a machine called the degerminator. This now goes into the actual milling process itself. The mill mills it and removes one part here, which is germ 100%, and also removes your final product, which is your unga.
So what percentage are you suffering?
The percentages of what I'd call as the byproducts can range from anywhere from 25% to down to 15%, depending. So you get what we call an outturn number, and the outturn number will sit between 75% and 85%. So that all depends on the quality of the raw material that you started off with. And basically, from a profit perspective, the higher your outturn, the closer you are to 100%, the better your quality. However, there is a limit that you can get to before you start including components of the germ, which is the oily product, which spoils your unga at the end of the day. It means your unga cannot stay for more than a week before it spoils. Okay? This is why you find that at home, when your parents take a gorogoro to get milled, they take it every week because the unga will not last more than a week.
Thank you very much, Zainab. Of course, just giving us an overview of the process that goes into, and of course, Kuguru, you mentioned about that, which is really a lot more processes that go into behind the scenes, and we've seen that live and pictures. Just moving away from the prize, I would wanted to have a quick look into what the CS bet said, just so that we can get a closer to it, and because I want to talk to us about, looking at the maize subsidy program, looking at the post-harvest storage. So just you should not buy a 2-kilogram packet of maize meal. That's at not more than 115 shillings. And if you do, you're being exploited. That's by millers now. This is according to Agriculture CS Willie Bet. Kenyans have been hoping for the saving grace of unga ugali. That's from the Galana Kulalu irrigation scheme. But Dan Mwangi serves us with the reality that as things stand, this unga will not be on the dinner tables anytime soon.
The Water and Irrigation Cabinet Secretary, alongside his agriculture counterpart, and the principal secretaries are among those who have been briefed on the latest updates in regard to the Galana Kulalu project, which is including the acquisition of new equipment for this project, which is to add on to what is here, such as these that are rambling beside me. The ramblings are not limited to machinery here. They're also including the questions and the rambles by Mwananchi on what happened to the maize meal that's meant to come from this project, and at a very subsidized price.
We have the sample that we have shown can be produced at 75 shillings. That is part of the proof of concept, but it's not for production. Now we are going into the production phase, and we are going to invite the private sector to come on board to do the production for us.
The Cabinet Secretary was non-committal on when the maize meal from the 7.3 billion shilling project will be produced and available on retail shelves. He instead chose to stick to the broader narrative of when the project will be handed over from the National Irrigation Board to the Agriculture Development Corporation, ADC.
By March, we want to see NIB handover to ADC. After March, we'd like to see ADC now commercialize. These are 10,000 acres plus the extended 10,000, 20,000 in total.
Much as the responses were evasive, the timeline CS Wamalwa gives for the commencement of commercialization further points to the availability of the 75 shilling 2-kilogram pack of unga at the shops being a distant reality. Before the setting up and operationalizing of the commercial functions of the plants, it may be a while, with some critics arguing that it could take a number of years. This subsidized maize meal has been the hope of many Kenyans who have been struggling under the weight of increasing prices after the state-sponsored subsidy period ended. Millers want Kenyans of further increased prices. However, the Agriculture Cabinet Secretary, Willie Bet, is not in full agreement with them.
Millers are also becoming businessmen. Of course, they are businessmen, but we don't want them to overstretch their business acumen. With profits and everything else loaded in, the price of flour, and this one we have had a meeting with the millers and we have agreed, the price should never exceed 115 per 2 kilogram bag.
The CS says the millers are buying a 90-kilogram bag at a maximum of 3,000 shillings, while the government is buying at 3,200 shillings.
We will take any other intervention if the prices threatens to go beyond 3,200.
The ping-pong between the government and millers over what is the truth remains to be at its heart a concern on food security for the country. The Galana Kulalu project is meant to deal with these issues, but has been struggling with the yield on the first phase dropping from 31 bags an acre in the period of April to October 2016 to 20 bags an acre between March 2017 to date.
As it was in the country, the other part of the country, we're under an attack of armyworms, which actually it took a very swift action in order to control, otherwise we would have lost everything. Considering the temperatures in this place are very high, they are conducive for this type of pest. There was some observation of an abnormally ambient high temperatures, which somehow affected the pollination.
The irrigation project, whose progress has already been delayed, once completed as promised, is to open the doors for phase 2, which covers 400,000 acres. As the country steps into these subsequent phases, the cost element remains a significant factor, and the government is looking to have universities offer solutions to lighten the load. These interventions, CS Bet says, are to reduce Kenyans' spend on food from an average of 47% of income to 25%. Dan Mwangi, NTV, at the Galana Kulalu irrigation scheme.
That was Dan Mwangi in his recent trip to the Galana Kulalu project. Mr. Kuguru, you've been accused of being businessmen in this whole process and just looking towards cashing in. We want to get your view, and then Anzetse will tell us how these prices are not really, decided by you, the farmers, or the dealers.
We are businessmen. All our millers are businessmen, and they are not there to do charity work. We have to make money and survive, educate our children, and have a reasonable, be able to afford a reasonable lifestyle like other Kenyans.
Granted,
the minister is an administrator.
Yes.
He's a policy maker, and he has no business discussing about businessmen because he does not understand it, he does not know it, and he cannot command businessmen on what to do, on how to make money. He has to stick on policy. But we are free market controlled.
Yes.
If the price of maize go up, we have no choice except to match the price of unga with the equivalent cost that's going up. If the government puts up the price of electricity and petrol and other inputs, we have no choice except to match the output price. But unfortunately, it drives the economy, inflation up, which hits back to on business again. So
maybe the question will be to what extent, or at what expense, especially even as you conduct your business, as you put it, is to what extent?
There are too many uncontrollable factors in this business of milling. For example, if there's going to be no rain, like now, the meteorological department are giving a focus that there will be La Nina situation this year. That means there will be no rain in March. If that situation happens, naturally there will be no harvest this year, and the price will be driven up because of lack of supply. If there's lack of supply, the demand creates a price to go up. So, like I said before somewhere else, whether the ministry likes it or not, if there's no harvest this year, there's a La Nina, we are going to be looking at a price of a 2-kilo packet of 200 shillings by end of March, because it is dependent on supply. And not only is it dependent on supply of maize, it depends even on transport.
Well, that's
and many other issues. So what the government need to do on this issue is to subsidize the local farmer, because when you subsidize the maize which is imported, you are actually subsidizing the foreign farmer. In Kenya, if you subsidize a local farmer, the local farmer will be able to grow enough and store in case of shortages and even export. And that is the situation we need to go into, because there's enough farming capacity if you interest the farmers to grow.
Great. Let's leave it at that. I just want to talk to the economists just really quickly before we get to Dan. Anzetse, well, 200 shillings for a 2-kilogram bag by March. That's the projection by the millers. From where you see it, and again, we've just discussed this really quickly, is that, you know, these prices cannot really quite be determined by just one particular person.
I mean, I think this notion of government edicts on pricing maize is quite inappropriate. I think that is more of a political economy strategy that they're using, and not a market economy strategy that they're using. As he said, you know, one of the things I've seen as an economist is that the rains already haven't come the way we had wanted. And going forward, they will probably not come how we want. And we are a rain-fed agricultural country. We are not an irrigation-fed. We are rain-fed. So when rain doesn't come, it has a direct impact on yields. We already saw in the clip that you showed that yields are already declining, okay, per acre. So already we're going to see more demand per farm than we've seen before. And that is naturally going to shift prices upwards. Okay. Now, one of the difficult positions that government is in is that, on one hand, I think they understand the need for subsidy, which is why they did that before. They understand the need to subsidize farming. I don't think in pricing. I think in terms of inputs and support, that would be the better subsidy. I don't think they should come in the point of pricing. I think the subsidy should come in the point of inputs and technical support to farmers to make their farms more productive. I think that is very important. But you need to understand that the government is in a very tight fiscal space. If you look at the sort of debt we're getting into, if you look at our expenditure, it's already growing aggressively. So really the question will be for government is, where will you find the money to subsidize this core function of your economy, which is feeding the people, in a manner where farmers are motivated to grow, and in a manner that consumers can afford the product. So it needs to be a very intelligent subsidy program that I don't think government has come up with yet.
We'll come to that and mention about what the government really is tasked to do. And we, of course, has recently had the Monetary Policy Committee meeting where they talk about inflation, talk about, you know, the weather, the drought. And, you know, speaking back to the March, and you mentioned about the weather conditions that are going to affect food prices. We'll come back to you very quickly. But before we do, let's cross over to my colleague Dan Mwangi, who's standing by at the Naivas Moi Avenue. Dan, I believe now you have Will Kimani, who's the CEO of Naivas, to just speak to us how they actually price their goods.
Yes, Laban, we have actually met up with Willie Kimani. He's going to speak to us in a bit. But now, just to point out that it's pretty much getting closer to lunchtime. That means the business activity around here, especially around the food area, is getting quite busy. You could see people are beginning to, you know, come in their numbers. And we're told that this is going to increase, especially when we get closer to 1 p.m. Because it's lunchtime and people want their ready-made lunch, and so the supermarkets are offering this. And we're actually going to figure out, rather understand from Willie, what exactly does this mean? Is this a very lucrative side of the business, or is it one that is riding on the rest of the business? So let's just get into it, Willie. Thanks for speaking to us. Maybe you could just tell us, we're seeing people coming here in their numbers, and like you've told me, they usually are even more. How profitable is this side of the business, or is it one that rides on the rest of the business?
Yeah, well, one of the best things is that actually this kind of business is quite profitable because you're actually in charge of the cost part of it. You're able to know where to source, and you're actually going into direct manufacturing at the site, and thereby we have full control, unlike whereby it's a third-party product. This is actually 100% made by us. We're in full control of the expenses, and thereby we're able to actually make at least a shilling more than actually buying the traditional items.
And is there, what percentage does this side of the food give towards your revenue?
Well, it depends from store by store. Our aim and target is that our fresh departments might at least, by year 2020, to actually be at least minimum 35% of our total business. And that means concentrating on our bakeries, our butcheries, fresh area of the veggies, and of course the hot kitchens. And ultimately, that is actually what will help us, because one, they actually are differentiator. They differentiate us from competition, because the way competition cooks the bread or bakes the bread rather, or cooks the chapati and the stew and all those, is actually quite different. So this is actually also a differentiator and also a clear puller for customers.
Okay, so we're talking about food prices generally, which is still part of the conversation we're having. And one of the things that many people wonder when it comes to the retail stores, the supermarkets especially, who sets the prices of this side where you're talking about the fresh made food is really up to you, right? But for this other, the unga ugali, the milk, the bread we see here, the eggs we're seeing, all this, who sets the prices? Is it you, or because we still see different prices from one supermarket, one brand to another?
Well, in normal instances, it depends with the supplier contract that you have. But ultimately, what is actually as a rider is that we work from a price list. And this price list has a clear recommended retail pricing. And out of that RRP, you only have a margin of moving in between 2% up, 2% down, and not anything lower. So you actually sign up depending with the supplier. Some will allow you to actually have a plus or minus 5%, but ultimately the RRP, the recommended retail price, is actually given by the supplier of the product. So if you're actually looking at, let's say, the bread, you'll actually have a clear RRP. We have things like sodas which already even have the price already embedded in the product label and all that. So ultimately, it's actually the suppliers who are actually coming up with the price list, and all what to just do is just work within the confines of the RRP.
Okay. Yes. And when it comes to people buying food, what trends have you noticed of maybe over the last year, for instance? People have been saying, the economy has been tough on them. Have we seen any drop in terms of purchases of food, or are people still buying food because they still have to do the same way from you?
Well, to be very honest, based on last year, food for us grew by more than 60%, not the food division. And this largely because, of course, of the market, some of the competitors, of course, not being able to, but also at the same time, the pantry loading that was there during the election nearing period was actually quite significant in that out of that 60%, it possibly contributes around 15%, because majority of the people completely went all out, pantry loaded, and when you actually buy food, you have to consume it. So there's actually extra consumption of food during the last, at least the last 2 quarters. We have actually seen quite a good jump in food consumption. So food has actually been growing. When it actually comes even to, let's say, the hot kitchens also, quite a very good trend, quite picking quite well. And more so, the evening shopper is now buying food more than actually he was some while back. And this is actually coming because of trust now. People now are trusting our hot kitchens more so to be able to deliver to them the desired quality.
Okay, and I remember when this design or this format of shopping came up in Kenya with some of the retailers, we saw largely it was pretty much the bachelors who are coming here. Is it still the same trend, or are we seeing whole families coming to buy their full meals here?
No, actually it's a destination now. For example, if you go to our Seta store or Nakuru store, even Nyali store, families will actually all gather there on Sundays and buy food, because one of the key things is that there's clear control of time. So they're going to get it on time, quite fast and all that. So this is more of a new trend going for this. Not necessarily just a bachelor's thing. No. Families are buying lunch because the Kenyan family is now busier and all that. And we're also more affordable. So you'll actually find the same way with people just do their own pizza as they go out and all that. They're able to order for specialty foods and all. And foods that you don't really have to make. You don't have to buy all the wheat flour and start making the chapati from scratch. Yet you can quickly make your stew, buy the chapatis from a deli. So it's a combination of both, but largely we cannot say this is just a bachelor's thing.
Okay, and so what foods have you seen have really increased in price over the past number of months, say? Because we know unga ugali was on the subsidy program, which now has moved on. But have you seen it that has actually significantly gone up over time, or any which has gone down significantly as well?
No, largely so. I think the main price that have actually moved, apart from the normal commodities that you're talking about, your sugar and maize flour. Maize flour is actually the most significant. And largely so it did not also not go up as much as to where it was before, because we used to be at the ranges of 135 shillings before the subsidy program. So right now it just went to around 112 to between 110 to 117 shillings, away from 90 shillings, which is not as, at least it's more controlled. And happily so, at least now we have market forces controlling it, in whereby I'm able to talk directly to my supplier and I'm able to come up with proper pricing. For example, just the other day we had a very nice offer on soko ugali with my supplier couple, and I was giving the same price for 105 shillings. So that market forces now take charge of the availability of products and pricing, rather than having clear subsidy.
So do you foresee, because the CS said that, in winding up, the CS said that unga ugali should not go above 150 shillings for a kilogram pack. Do you feel that is a practical step the government is making, or is it making a declaration that may not be realistic when it comes to the market dynamics?
It's all about the market force, supply and demand. If there's no supply of the raw material, then not unless the government still comes back into it, then absolutely the price will just go by the market forces and the demand also. So the demand is, of course, will be higher. These are our staple food. But at the same time, if there is no supply or largely there is effect, we shall go, the prices shall skyrocket and all that, if not well controlled. Or at the same time, if you actually get more supply and you're actually stable, you might actually find that the price might even go lower than the subsidy price. So let markets be. This is a free market, and let it be thus. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's Willie Kimani, the Chief Commercial Officer of Naivas Supermarkets, just giving us some insight in terms of what exactly the pricing elements are entailed, what entails the pricing elements. And so, like I said, it's lunchtime, which is coming through. The numbers are coming, people are coming in, buying and leaving. We even have an eating area later on. And so just to leave you with some shots of food so that as you have your lunch, you can know what you're missing. Because I can hear people just saying how much they would like to have this food. But nonetheless, this is a culture that has come up over the years, where we have the supermarket selling fresh food, freshly cooked food. And like Willie has said, it used to be a bachelor's heaven, but now it seems it's becoming a family destination, according to him. And so, Laban, as I hand over to you in studio, may you get a good meal this afternoon. Dan Mwangi from the supermarket, Naivas Supermarket on Moy Avenue. Have yourself a great afternoon. Back to you, Laban.
Thank you very much, Dan, and of course be sure to carry some lunch there for the team. We'll be coming back to our panelists really quickly, and of course just delving deeper into matters economy and to matters pricing just after this break. All right, welcome back to NTV Today. Today, of course, we give a special focus on matters food, and we'll be discussing about food prices and just looking at how that has impacted on your plate of food, especially, and this is actually a direct impact also to the inflation numbers. And just to give us a sense and to just get really deeply into the discussion, I want to come into Anzetse and just talk to us about, I mean, different economists will give different analysis and into how they arrive to the inflation projections for 2018. But let's stick to the CBK average of 7.5%. What we have is that also Stanchart has actually released its numbers for today, saying that the economy is expected to grow at 4.6%. That's in the year 2018. The central bank will peg it at 6.2%. We've had also Stanbic Bank at 5.6%. So just really quickly, what would you...
I would say our economy will probably grow between 5.2 to 5.5%. I think depending on environmental factors, we can expect our inflation to be where the CBK says, around 7.5 plus. I think going below that will be quite difficult, because you also have to remember we're in a global economy where global oil prices are improving. So the import cost of oil, which is what we do substantially in terms of our current account, the cost of oil will increase significantly. And so that will have a knock-on effect on inflation in the country. I think when you compound that with sort of the agricultural situation that we're seeing, where rains are not as robust as we had hoped, again, we'll see an inflation knock in terms of cost of food. I think there are two ways the government, the economy could go. I think on one hand, we can try and say this is an economy out of elections and that we're ready for business and that we're ready for engagement, and sort of pitch ourselves in that way, in which case I'm already seeing, from where I'm sitting, a lot of interest, and both domestically and internationally, in engaging with the Kenyan economy going forward for the next 5 years. On the other hand, if we let the international community know that we still have these domestic problems of political conflict and tribal conflict, then they'll just, first 3 months, they'll give us a try. But after March, once we've told them what we're doing, they will now step back and say, okay, Kenya is gone for now, and we need to invest elsewhere. So I think it's really important for us as a country to set the tone of the sort of environment we're creating for business.
And the environment, of course, will also be largely impacted by the cost of food. So you see that, the knock-on effect that the food will have on these numbers.
A good economy for a developing country like Kenya should hedge itself and target a growth of 7 to 15% per annum. If we can achieve those numbers, we can control the inflation and the growth at the same time and keep our prices manageable. And also the middle income groups also growing at and energizing the market. But it's dependent on very, very many issues. Like Madam says here, it's a lot dependent on politics. Like Moi said once, siasa baya, maisha baya. Kama siasa itakuwa baya, we don't expect any growth. In fact, we shall grow at a negative rate. So we need to make sure that our politics are controlled. Number two, we depend on the environment. And there are so many other issues that depend on the environment. Number three, we are lucky in this country that we got many factors that interest tourists to come, even when we got problems. So if we develop a tourist market which brings the foreign exchange to this country, it stimulates economic growth. So on the issue of food, if the normal common man, because our nation has got a big percentage of poor people below the economic, what you call the economic poverty line. If you can keep these people well fed, that means even in education you are producing healthy people who are able to stay in a class and learn because they've got food in their stomach. And also control the medicine, the medical climate, so that people, you control their cost of medications. Great. All these factors, you can get a stronger nation and develop the future growth, so that we are focusing on a country that's growing. At the moment, we are stagnant to the extent because we are going up and down. One day we are got very, very hopeful figures. The following day we are down. So we need to make sure that we create correct policy, government policy, that is aimed at giving factors which cause growth.
May I just add on that policy note? I think a very important equation that's being ignored is fiscal policy. We are in a very tight fiscal space right now, okay? So when we're going forward as a country, we need to really start asking government, what are you borrowing and what are you borrowing it for? That is a conversation that Kenyans are not having. Kenyans are saying, oh, government is getting into debt, we don't know why. Yes, your job is to say, what are you borrowing as government and what are you borrowing for? Because the tighter our fiscal space, the less money we as Kenyan will have to feed agriculture, to feed education, to feed health. If we are spending all our money on debt and payments, that money required to build the nation will simply not be there. Okay. So when you're looking at the policy space, we're not only talking about agricultural policy, educational policy, and health policy. We're also talking about fiscal policy, which is the most important component, because fiscal is what gives the money for all these other sectors. So if we don't have a very sober conversation around where we're going in terms of our fiscal policy, then we're really missing the point as a nation.
Well, really quickly, one big factor that affects our economy is corruption. No matter what policies you have, no matter how much you borrow and invest.
Just kind of draw it to a landing. I want to just talk to Kuguru about, the strategic food reserves. We're told that we can actually accommodate. We have less than 3 million bags currently in our reserves. What I'm meant to understand, especially, is that we can actually consume 3 million bags as a country monthly. So we're looking at, having a buffer of just about a month for that matter. Do you think this is sufficient, and does that open up now avenues for importation?
The government keeps strategic stocks of maize to intervene in drought areas and to needy cases through the cereal boards of Kenya, through the cereal board stores. And I don't know how much policy they have to keep. But consumption in this country for maize meal is approximately 3 million bags per month. And the country is able to produce that. My group of millers, United Grain Millers, made from small to large, they will build a capacity of 53% of the total maize requirement in this country, which is about 1.8 million bags a month. This may be more than strategic maize stocks by the government. And I think that if the government decided that a cereal board, instead of using them as a storage for strategic grain, they should use them for an economic transition of grain, where all the maize is bought from the farmers effectively, because you can see now the farmers take their maize to the cereal board and they are queuing for 2 weeks, 3-mile queues. So it's very ineffective. So if they brought effectiveness in the purchase of grain at cereal board, and they sold the same grain to the millers, like they have been using during this time of shortage, the cereal board would become an active transition of grain. And they would all the time have grain, so they never have to store. And when they store the maize sometimes for 3 or 4 years. By the time they sell, the maize has gone bad because of long-term storage. So they are wasting their energy and effort and money, and it is very, very anti-development establishment unless they use it for transition of grain. So they can even import and store it in a cereal board and let the millers buy that maize so the money cycle. Instead of keeping the maize there, let the money turn around. They buy, sell, buy and sell.
Great. Okay, Kuguru, that comes in as a policy suggestion to government. But again, the question is this opening up avenues for importation? Because I know you as millers, you've had kind of, kind of a hate, dislike conversation, especially when you go into kind of importation of maize to the country. Importation
of maize should be an open slate. It should not be locked, because maize is a commodity, and maize is reliant on market forces. So if the local farmers are subsidized to grow maize cheaply, we should be a net exporter. So we should not fear to import. As long as we can compete with Zimbabwe, compete with Malawi, compete with South Africa, our grain should be equal to the price. So why should we import? We should be able to export.
It's hard to be competitive, I would think, looking at, of course, the margin of skills and what other countries and the machinery and the level of input that is actually employed in the farms. And
well, I think the point of subsidy of government is the issue. I don't think government should be subsidizing the cost of maize at the end of the value chain. They should be subsidizing the inputs to maize production at the earlier point of the chain, because one of the biggest issues that we're not talking about is how much farmers get. And when you look at 80% of rural population in Kenya is reliant on agriculture, we need to make sure that these people are making a decent living, right? So I think the point of subsidy should be at the earlier on in the value chain rather than later on in the value chain. I think in terms of the points you're making around the cost of maize, I think there are certain issues he's highlighted, such as the cost of production, electricity, labor, transport. I mean, unless government really makes very significant policy changes, and we can see it in transport in terms of the SGR and how they're trying to use that to reduce costs of transport. But things like cost of electricity, this subsidy that the government has talked about, when will it be effected and who will pay for it? These are all real things. Whatever subsidy government makes, someone has to pay for that subsidy. And that is what, as an economist, I'm concerned about, is that you can subsidize transport, you can subsidize electricity, you can subsidize all these things, but who's going to pay for that subsidy? And that invariably will be the Kenyan people. So we need a sustainable plan, long-term plan from government in terms of we're going to create these subsidies to these industries, and this is how we're going to pay it back. Without that holistic plan, then government is really leaving us all in the dark in terms of whether that plan will work or not.
For the millers, what should be done by them? Because I'd hate it to be like a conversation that about, Serikali, should do this. And
I don't think government should even enter this equation.
Yeah.
In the ideal world, what would happen is that government does what it can in terms of subsidies, and then the cost and demand, the supply and demand equation is informed by the cost that they can give it at and the import costs. One of the biggest problems we're having as a manufacturing country is that our cost of production is so high that goods as far as India and China are cheaper than what we produce locally. So the real question for me as an economist is, how do we get our cost of production down so that people know that Kenyan products are of high quality and are competitive? We are not there yet. We're not there in that space. And as long as that happens, there'll always be this idea that imports are evil, you won't buy Kenyan goods and all this sort of stuff. And that will continue as long as our goods are not competitive. So really for me, the question for government and private sector is, how do we make our goods competitive so that we are the first choice that Kenyans come to?
Kuguru, do you see this as a challenge to you as millers? Because when we had that story by Zainab, and of course you could see within the process that goes on into kind of actually just creating that maize flour. Any ideas on new input or new technological advancements that you can actually employ to kind of just reduce your cost of production?
Millers middle handlers of grain. They receive the grain in whole, they crush a grain, and export it as a milled grain. They add value. That cost of adding value is fixed cost. So if they receive grain at a higher price, they'll release it at a higher price. There's no question of reducing the price here in between of milling. The price needs to be reduced prior to receiving the maize. The price needs to be reduced at a farm. Yeah. The government needs to subsidize farm equipment so we can mechanize our farms. They need to subsidize irrigation so we can produce more even in drought times. They need to look at a farming situation, just like South Africa. Because if they can subsidize there and ask millers mill at this price and sell, and if they can levy a fee on mill price and pay for the subsidy. So this thing, if it's well organized, can be self-subsidizing. We can subsidize them. We can subsidize the situation at a farm if there was good policy within the same crop, so that the government does not have to rely on taxpayers' money. It's just a policy. And the government needs to have economists and professionals and technocrats who look at from the beginning to the end of the chain, and it can be done. And I know, look at the sugar industry now. Our sugar in this country is so high in cost that we cannot afford to compete with imported sugar. And yet, we go to some of the best farms and some of the best conditions in the world for growing sugarcane. We should be a net exporter of sugar, and same as maize, same as coffee. All these things are, agricultural sector is collapsing because of wrong policy or policy which is not implemented.
Let me throw a span in the works. And of course, looking at it in importation, we're looking at markets outside the EAC. But I'm just looking at how can even, as we as a country, leverage on the markets that we have, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, regionally, to actually just kind of leverage on our food sufficiency.
Let me say something about that. I think you need to look at the political economy of what you're talking about. I mean,
makes sense, but I mean, the potential is there. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
I'm looking at potential.
No. I mean, what I'm talking about is, okay, on one hand, he's really well outlined the issues of cost of production here. So already as a Kenyan product, you're going out there with a higher product than most of your partners. Now, when we look at the EAC, yes, we're meant to be brothers and sisters, and we're meant to be sort of going into this economic journey together. But the reality is that a lot of the EAC countries are threatened by Kenya because of the power of our industrial base and how much bigger we are. Now, there are countries like Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Tanzania that are really beginning to build their industrial base and their industrial capacity. So there's a really shift in mentality there. What they want is for their markets to feed their industry. They don't want their markets to feed Kenyan products. So we as Kenyans here have our export products, which are very little, and we're trying to feed that into the EAC, but the EAC is over here saying, no, we want to reserve our economies for our industry. So this sort of polarization of position going on in the EAC that I don't think is being talked about openly. I think we need to understand that a lot of countries are following national mandates. They're not following EAC mandates, and they're prioritizing the own welfare of their own industry beyond and above. We're not even looking at, as EAC, what commodity could be priced most efficiently in what country. We're not even there in terms of conversation. For example, I'd say right now Uganda should do sugar, not Kenya, because Uganda is much better at it. Yeah. But we're not even there because every country is trying to protect their market share in their respective economies, and we're not coming together as a region saying, let us look at our global market space and how we can more effectively build industry to exploit it. So we're still in a very much a nationalistic mind space right now. It's
very shocking because the policies that have been developed towards this, you're talking about a single customs territory, you're talking about a common market. No, so is it all on paper?
Non-tariff barriers are real. Non-tariff barriers are real. You can have all the policy and all the tariffs that you want, but non-tariff barriers are real, from just being stopped at the border because of language. Also, how do people assess what you're bringing in? When you have a lorry, what are you carrying? Are you carrying mattresses? Are you carrying vegetables? How is that assessed when there's no weighing, when there's no... There's a lot of discretion at the trade official level in terms of charging you whatever fee you're going to get. So when you look at Kenyan exporters, they have a lot of problems around these non-tariff barriers, and a lot of them prevent them, and the customs procedures, even the language is an issue around getting their goods across the border. So until we as EAC get really real around people are protecting their markets for their own industries around, we have these non-tariff barriers that are impeding the ability of our goods to cross borders. If that conversation is not happening, we can create as many policies as we want, but they won't be a reality for many of us.
Kuguru, what's stopping you from playing out in the East African market space?
Well, we are, because Kenya is a big importer of products from East African market in relationship to maize. Kenya imports maize through the border of Tanzania and through the border of Uganda because we are a net consumer. And because we are not self-sufficient. If we were able to produce excess quantity, we can also be able to export to these countries when those countries are having shortage. But you can see now the situation leads to us to import from outside the COMESA. We are importing from South Africa, even to Mexico and to America. So if we had grown enough, we should be able to supply these countries depending on the price that we have, because it's not about pricing. If we can produce our maize cheaper, we can export to the world. There's demand, international demand, because maize is not only eaten by people, it's also eaten by animals. Maize is eaten for cattle feed, for dairy feed, and for other animals. So we can export maize. There's enough market if we were able to grow that crop at a cost-effective price.
The conversation on how to become competitive, of course, has been mentioned further afield, and you have actually even brought it out there. But just before we come to that, we have some breaking news coming out just now out of Jamhuri High School, that's here in Nairobi. We had meant to understand that the school has been closed indefinitely. Of course, that's after a fight broke out earlier today, impeding just two actually communities. We had the Christians and the Muslims who actually were fighting this earlier around today. We're told some were actually admitted to hospital. We have my colleague Trevor Mbija, who's right there, and will be giving us an update as we go along. But just breaking news coming out of Jamhuri is that the school has been closed indefinitely. All right, so just issue of competitiveness. I just want to bring that up and just make sure that we can actually understand, as a country, how do we ensure that we actually are competitive between how we actually are trading with our partners and the world. I don't know who wants to
I mean, I can start with that. I mean, I think our cost of electricity has been a big complaint that I think the government knows very well. And the president did indicate last year that he would cut the cost by half for certain segments of electricity power. The only question I have is how we're going to support that fiscally. What is the fiscal support to make that a reality? So electricity is one. Transport is a big one against government is coming with the SGR. But in terms of the pricing of SGR for freight, in a manner that allows government to recover the cost that it used to build SGR, again, that is a question. I think the other big thing is the cost of labor. We are an expensive country. I'm of the view that our cost of labor shouldn't go down. I think what we need to focus on as a country is increasing productivity. I think there's a lot of room to increase our productivity as a country at farm level and at manufacturing level, which is what we're talking about, to really get more units per person than we are getting right now. So I think around labor, the conversation should be around productivity and not around reducing wages, because I think the wages are already quite low, if not too low already. So I really feel that there are very clear ways through which, and I haven't even talked about the agricultural value chain and all the inefficiencies across that, from low inputs to poor harvesting methods, to post-harvest losses, to post-storage, to loss before market. There's an entire value chain in agriculture that is very inefficient, that we could really tweak to make ourselves more efficient. So I think there's plenty of scope for what we need to do, and this is work that we can do as a country. And I don't think that we need to be sitting here talking about these things that other people know, that the country knows. We need to start implementing it. And what I'm saying is, when are we going to start implementing all of these things we know need to happen?
All right, Kuguru, from your point of view, especially also as a businessman, what can be done differently?
Well, I think that in order to be able to be competitive in this country, particularly in the milling industry, I think that we have to receive a cost-effective input within our systems. Like Madam says, the government not even the government, but the industry need to consider cheaper power source, and also high-quality power source, because power in this country is not really cheap and not good quality. Because you receive power that breaks down, that fluctuates, that it affects a lot of productivity and effectiveness of production. So it drives the price up. So to be able to be competitive in the milling industry, we need inputs, like you say, transportation, cost of fuel.
Just before we move away from
cost of labor.
There was a directive, of course, by the president and looking at 50% waiver, especially if you operate at night. From your seat, as a miller, how do you see this, you know, kind of working out for you, especially, and you know, at the end of it all, we're looking at the price and your cost of production. Yeah,
the cost of electricity going down by half by working at different or discriminatory hours. It's okay because they help to reduce the price a little, but very minimal, because there are so many other factors you got to consider. Labor factor is our people are generally very unproductive because they are also poorly paid. We can't afford to employ very highly paid people who are very professional and people who risk productivity because they are not well trained. The training facilities are not there. So you find that we employ people from the slums, and when you employ those kind of people, they give you what you give them. If you give them low salaries, they are giving you low productivity. Where they work day or night. The cost of infidelity, you know, our people, because of the culture, many of them are not really honest. You know, you cannot do business from far. You cannot build a mill now in the Isiolo and run it from Nairobi because you need to leave it to people. You put systems and they're broken down because the labor factor we have here requires more training and maybe also more to build a culture of work culture that we do in other countries.
I'm sorry to have thrown a span in your ox, but you can still go on with your closing remark. It's just to kind of, you know, what can be done differently as a business community, and I'm going to come to Anzetse also to give a closing remark.
Yes. Yeah. I think what can be done differently in this country to be able to build our country starts from education system, right from schools. Culture of education. You need to train our people properly and bring a culture of morality from our schools, so that when people finish our schools and university, they are employable. Because employability does not mean giving people a job. It means giving people a job and trusting them and leaving them to work on their own. In this country, you find, I find from industry that most of the people need to be supervised, and supervisors need to be supervised also. So you find that the cost escalate on a factory floor. So we need to change the culture of education from schools.
I think private sector needs to really organize itself at county level. I think private sector is good at working from Nairobi, and that's been done. But I think really at county level, in the context of devolution, we're seeing county governments getting very active and very aggressive. I think private sector needs now to become the true partner at county government level to articulate the issues that he's talking about, so that we don't just rely on national government for all of these things. There are things at county level that can be affected at the county level that would make the business environment more enabling for industry. For example, when it comes to vocational training, which is what he's talking about, that's a devolved function. You know, government is only responsible for sort of primary and secondary, but when it comes to tertiary or sort of vocational training, that is something that is done at county level. So I really feel private sector now needs to become aware of devolution and really leverage the opportunities at county level to really have the conversation at a much realer level, in a way that they can meet the leaders and deal with the leaders on a personal basis to really get those changes effected at the county level.
Anzetse Were, thank you very much for speaking with us. Peter Kuguru, who's the chairman, again, United Grain Millers Association, Asante Sana, and we look forward to more analysis and more conversations, especially around these matters to do with the food prices.